the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. As we look out these beautiful windows, we see the nice winter environment in San Francisco. One of the reasons why we have so many great sailors in the San Francisco area is because we have windy summers and beautifully calm winters, and you have to learn how to race in light air and heavy air. And most people don't realize when they come into San Francisco Bay that the first lighthouse on the West Coast is in San Francisco Bay, and we're going to hear all about it today. So we have three speakers. Jeff Gale, who is the executive director of the Alcatraz Restoration Project. He first remembers being on a boat when he was a 5-year-old, and his folks in San Diego took him sailing, and he remembers completely the whole experience of going sailing. And then as a UCLA student, he took several classes in oceanography and began scuba diving in LA and Catalina and Santa Barbara and all around. And then he got an accidental job being the managing director of the Coit Lighthouse, and then made it into an interpretive site. As he got more and more into it, he got more and more into the whole lighthouse culture. And most of us don't know, but in 1983, the US Lighthouse Society was formed and began restoring lighthouses all over the country. And in 2004, he became executive director of the Lighthouse Society, and so he brings lots of expertise in that subject. But as we know, you can't get much done without building teams. And the team that they have includes Barbara Paley, who's here and will speak as well. She is the local connection to the Alcatraz Lighthouse Restoration Project. She remembers looking at lighthouses as a young kid in Brooklyn, out on the tip of Coney Island, and thinking how masterfully cool these things were, because not only had they a function, they served real important navigational function, but they were beautiful and historic and all the rest of that sort of stuff. And then she became a genuine sailor. She raced in the J-35 fleet in San Francisco Bay, and then she did several bareboat charters in Greece, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific Northwest, and basically got into sailing in an earnest way, and became a charter member of the Alcatraz Restoration Project and a charter member of the Lighthouse Society. Holy moly. And so we'll have lots of questions for her. But you got to have an architect. If you want to restore something or build something, you got to have an architect. So Lisa, their third speaker, Yurkovich, is in fact an architect. She remembers the first time ever getting on a boat as a third or fourth grader, getting on a dad's friend's ski boat back there in Ohio. And she remembers that it was a really big deal to put on the life jacket because they were earnestly interested in her safety. And she's working on a very, very interesting project. Those of you who know that we're going to restore the Hyde Street Pier, and that's a big deal. I'm on the board of the museum, and we're looking forward to this $90 million expenditure to restore the Hyde Street Pier. She's actually a consulting architect onto that project, and she is also the same for the Lighthouse Restoration Project. So it's really with great pleasure that we introduce, we'll have two speakers, and then for the Q&A, all three, Jeff Gales and Barbara Paley, come on up and tell us all about the Alcatraz Lighthouse Preservation Project.
Thank you, Ron. Let me take the microphone here, like I was instructed. Very good. Thank you, Ron, for having us. Well, what an amazing, beautiful day it is today. And just so happy to be here. I'm not sure what the level of interest in this room is for lighthouses, but you know, we are kindred spirits. We are lighthouse people. As people who are sailors, boaters, yachtsmen, you understand lighthouses, you understand their function, and you share a love of the ocean, like as we do. So I think we are kindred spirits here. And so I always like talking to people of like minds. Would you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Before we get started, though, I just want to have a quick Q&A just to see how good you are. So can anybody tell me the tallest lighthouse in the United States? The tallest lighthouse in the United States. That's not a trick question. No, not Alcatraz, I'm afraid. But I'm glad that you know there's a lighthouse on Alcatraz. Most people do not. Yes, that's good. So you get a point for that. That's Cape Hatteras in North Carolina. Cape Hatteras. It was, interestingly enough, that lighthouse, which is over 200 feet tall, was relocated 800 feet inland to save it from the ocean destroying it. Okay, one more question real quick. What's the longest continually operating lighthouse in the United States? The longest continually operating lighthouse in the United States. And I'll give you a hint. It was built during the colonial times. Yes, sir. Boston Light. Yes. Yeah, you must have read the New York Times article. Yeah. So there's a lighthouse keeper at Boston Lighthouse. She's actually more of an interpretive. Yeah, very good. Yeah, you get 2 points for that. Good job. You win. Yeah, we actually, I mean, for 3 points for reading newspapers. Good job. But that keeper was actually assigned that job after Ted Kennedy got a bill passed by Congress to honor the role of lighthouse keepers in America. And it was at that time that Congress decided they were going to honor the history by having a lighthouse keeper, one remaining lighthouse keeper official in the United States. And it's the one that lives and works at Boston Lighthouse. Anyways, there's a longer story there, but we got to get started with our presentation. So good job on the Q&A there. So as Ron mentioned, I'm Jeff Gales, and this is Barbara Paley, my dear friend and the most amazing volunteer for the Alcatraz Project. I'm with the US Lighthouse Society, and we're a national lighthouse preservation organization. We look at lighthouse preservation not only locally, by state, by city, but by the entire country, and even internationally as well. So if you look at the first slide here we have presented, we are really going full force now after COVID, trying to reinvigorate our Alcatraz Restoration Project. So Ron already did the introductions, and so I'll just skip to the next slide here. Okay, so in today's presentation, we're going to talk about the Lighthouse Society a little bit. We're going to talk about the history of the Alcatraz Lighthouse, which I'm sure you're going to find fascinating. We're going to talk about our organization, our sub-organization, the Alcatraz Lighthouse Preservation Project, and our plans, and of course how you guys can help us, hopefully with this project. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and start a quick video. It's a 3-minute video to give you an overview that we produced a little while ago. Here we go. When you come across the bay, you see that lighthouse, you get that feeling of safety, of connection. This lighthouse represents bravery, selflessness, and it's that feeling that the Lighthouse Society is trying to preserve.
The lighthouse in the middle of the bay is a beacon for mariners, but also such a historic lighthouse. It was the first site of a lighthouse on the West Coast in 1854. 1.5 million people a year come out to Alcatraz, and they're excited. This lighthouse is a very important asset to telling that Alcatraz story.
I am a member of the US Lighthouse Society, and I love lighthouses. I hug them. The project that's being undertaken by the Lighthouse Society with the Park Service and the Coast Guard is two-part. One is to repair the lighthouse, and then going forward is to preserve it for the next generations.
Well, the problem with the Alcatraz Lighthouse is that we're in a marine environment with salt penetrating the concrete and rusting the metal framing, the term they call spalling. When that metal rusts, it expands, and we've got a major problem. And when you've got the wind and the fog coming through that Golden Gate, it just tears this place up.
Right now, the public is not permitted to go into the lighthouse itself, but one of the objectives of this project is to repair the tower and the internal structure so that people can go into the tower.
The history is one thing about the lighthouse, but then when you climb up these steps, this is an amazing view.
It is just thrilling to get up there. You can't get that view except on top of that lighthouse.
But we can't count on federal, state, or even formal grants to fund this project. We're going to rely heavily on private donors and hopefully corporate sponsors as well.
And they can walk along Fisherman's Wharf and say to their buddy, "That's my lighthouse. You know, I'm part of that."
It's part of the landscape. It's hard to imagine San Francisco without the Alcatraz Island light beaming down on it. When you see that light, you're coming home.
To me, losing the visual of seeing this light beacon out in the middle of the bay would be a travesty.
Without donations, there is a real risk that this lighthouse will not persevere. We cannot let that happen.
We all need to save this icon. Okay. Do I see everybody tearing up a little bit? Maybe? Thank you. All right. Nope. That and Control L. Ta-da! There we go. Okay, well, Barbara was the force behind producing that video, and I think it tells the story exceptionally well how important Alcatraz Lighthouse is, not just as a navigational aid, and we'll go over that in just a minute. You know, the Alcatraz Island National Park, it's a prison at the moment. It's an abandoned prison. They want it to be scary. They want it to be a prison and draw tourists. But the lighthouse deserves to be rehabilitated and turned into a shining beacon it once was. That's what we believe, at least. Hopefully we'll convince you of the same. So, not to dawdle here too much, we got the US Lighthouse Society. It's founded in the Bay Area in San Francisco by a retired Coast Guard officer, Wayne Wheeler. That's his picture up there in the very top in his home office. He realized early on in his career as head aides to navigation in San Francisco that a lot of the history of lighthouses, not just in the Bay Area, but in the United States, was being lost for various reasons. And so he decided to start this nonprofit in addition to his duties as a Coast Guard officer. Eventually, the Lighthouse Society took over, and when he started with lighthouses, you barely could even visit any of them. I mean, now you could drive up the coast and visit a whole bunch. Back then, they were pretty much most of them were closed to the public. So he really started a movement, Wayne Wheeler. And one of the reasons why Alcatraz is so important to our organization, well, all lighthouses are, but Alcatraz especially, is because this is where we were founded. This is our home, and we have a special reverence for the Bay Area lights. So going a little bit further into the history of this Lighthouse Society, as you look at the bullet points there, we're dedicated to preserve and share the history and legacy of America's lighthouses. We're I'm sorry, what did you say? No. Okay. Well, we're a beacon to the American lighthouse community, providing guidance and resources to all things lighthouse. So we have a lot of organizations around the country that rely on us for information about what to do, where to go, who to see when they want to restore a lighthouse. We promote a national lighthouse preservation as opposed to local. We want to save all the lighthouses, but of course this presentation is about Alcatraz. We also, one of the ways we raise funds to support our operations is we conduct lighthouse tours. Believe it or not, we have people like us who want to go visit lighthouses all over the world. We just had a lighthouse tour come back from Spain a couple of weeks ago. We take people on lighthouse tours domestically to Maine, to New England, to Florida, San Francisco Bay, of course. So because our members span the country, we have a lot of people wanting to travel with us, and it's a great way for us to raise money for our operations. And of course, we're a membership-based organization as well. one of the main missions of the Lighthouse Society is to preserve the history. And in our goal to preserve the history, we've developed one of the largest lighthouse research archives in the United States, second only to the National Archives in DC. And it all started with a library that Wayne Wheeler was given by the US Coast Guard in District 13, this district here in the Bay Area, to preserve, because they were going to throw away the books. They didn't need them anymore. So it all started with those saving of those volumes. We've received multiple awards for restoration and preservation projects that we've undertaken, and even from the White House. We received a commendation from the Bush administration a number of years ago. And we provide consulting to organizations and authorities such as the National Park Service, the Coast Guard. Anybody who owns a lighthouse, usually we're their first call. Because when you type lighthouses in on the computer, US Lighthouse Society usually comes up first. And so they call us. And then, of course, we take, we're a leadership. We take a leadership role of specific projects also when nobody else will take them on, such as Thomas Point Shoal in the Chesapeake Bay. How many people have ever sailed in the Chesapeake? Yeah. So there's a famous lighthouse called Thomas Point Shoal, which is now designated a National Historic Landmark. There's only a few of those in the United States, but it's one of them. And, of course, have you heard of the Lightship Relief at Jack London Square? Well, we rescued that from Alaska and restored it stem to stern. And I'm going to work with Ron to get it over to your new project here in High Street Pier, hopefully. So that'll be a great improvement in its current location for sure. Okay, moving on. So why Alcatraz? Why do we want to preserve Alcatraz? Alcatraz Lighthouse, because we want to preserve the maritime history of the space in addition to the tourist space of the prison. So the lighthouse, of course, is an important icon of the San Francisco Bay. I mean, can you imagine driving down the hill to the yacht club and not seeing the island and the tower there? I mean, it's important. It's an important icon. I think we all can agree with that. You agree with that, don't you?
I absolutely agree with that.
It's a working maritime asset. It is a current aid to navigation. It's still operational. So, you coming in from the Pacific Ocean, you would hit Mile Rock first when there was a lighthouse there. Now it's just a little light on the caisson. Then you hit Point Bonita at the entrance of the Golden Gate, and then you hit Alcatraz. So it's still used as an important aid to navigation, and most people don't realize that there's a lighthouse even on Alcatraz. I said that before. Sometimes people think it's like a watchtower or maybe it's a observation deck. No, it's actually a lighthouse, and it's an important lighthouse. I think anybody who sailed into the bay has probably used it at one time or another. Am I not right? I'm right. I know I'm right. Okay. And of course, it's a proud landmark of the San Francisco Bay. So there's so many historic structures that it's important to preserve in our city here in San Francisco. And Lisa, our architect, can talk about that a little bit. But the lighthouses are especially important because they make that maritime history tangible for people. We're so lucky in what we do here, you and members of the club and us dealing with lighthouses, that we are connected to the ocean, we're connected to the water. I bet there's a lot of people who live in the San Francisco Bay Area probably never get to the ocean. They never see it. They never go to the beach. They don't know about the amazing nature of lighthouses. So we are privileged in that sense. And then, of course, the last bullet point here, to create a unique tourist opportunity to reach the top of the tower, which has historically been impossible. And just before we move to the next slide, we have had the opportunity to offer special tours to Alcatraz Lighthouse through the Coast Guard and National Park Service. Rare, but we have done it. And anytime we open that door to that tower, the line queues up for a mile around the island. I mean, people go gaga over getting into that lighthouse. And they really make us feel good because we go gaga over all lighthouses, and they're going gaga over Alcatraz. There you go. All right. So I'm taking up way too much time here. Barbara, my boss, is saying I need to hurry up. So I'm going to give you just a brief history of the Alcatraz Lighthouse. And, most people don't realize it was the first lighthouse built. Ron mentioned that on the Pacific coast. So very important. Can you imagine the Pacific coast without any navigational aids? Back before lighthouses, in order to warn people about the cliffs and the fog and everything, the Army would shoot off cannons to warn ships about the dangers of the Bay Area here. Yeah, so lighthouses really were super important to be built, and Alcatraz was the first one to be built on the West Coast. In 1909, they had to build a new tower there. If you look at the slide on the upper left and down on the middle slide on the left, that shows you the original lighthouse that was on Alcatraz Island. It was part of the military installation that was based out there. It was never originally a prison. It was actually a military installation. It was a fort, basically. And then they built a lighthouse as part of that. And so, but in 1909, after the earthquake, the San Francisco earthquake in 06, they needed to rebuild the tower. So there you go. They rebuilt that beautiful new lighthouse on the right. It's a poured concrete reinforced steel structure. And they built that amazing keeper's duplex. Look at that beautiful building on the right. And then look what happened in the 1970s. Yeah. So in 1966, it was automated. Most lighthouses in the country were automated started in the 60s. That's why our organization was founded, because when you remove the human aspect from lighthouses, unfortunately, they will deteriorate. I mean, imagine removing the human aspect away from a ship that you own. Imagine never going and taking care of your vessel for a year. What would happen to it? Well, lighthouses are very similar to ships in that regard. You got to constantly maintain them. So in 1970, maybe in this room you might remember this. Remember when the Native Americans took over the island? Yeah. So they were trying to really, whatever they were trying to do, they took over the island and they started a fire at one point. Let me correct that. A fire broke out. We don't know who started it, but they were there. They occupied the island. And unfortunately, in addition to burning down a couple of the prison buildings, they burned down the commandant's house of the prison, and they burnt down the keeper's dwelling of the lighthouse, which had nothing to do with the prison, but there you go. The reason why the lighthouse survived, of course, you see the bottom slide on the lower right. You see how horribly damaged it was. The whole thing was completely wiped out. But the lighthouse was a poured concrete reinforced steel structure. It survived the fire, whereas the dwelling didn't, of course. So and that's the way it remains looking now. Now, we've cleaned up the lighthouse. The Coast Guard now has cleaned up the lighthouse a little bit. It's still off limits to the public and still being deteriorated every year by weather, what have you. But it pretty much remains looking the way it is now, which is a travesty. And then in 1972, the lighthouse, the property of the National Park Service took over, and it was declared a national recreation area, and then the National Historic Landmark, the island, the prison. But the Coast Guard still owns the lighthouse. So that's remained separate from the park and the prison. It's a very strange situation. That's why we're involved. So, Barbara, I will pass it to you.
I'm going to talk now. Hello. This has already been covered in the video, but I want to point out the 4 aspects of the project goals of what we want to accomplish with the Alcatraz Lighthouse Preservation Project. The first is to restore the tower and restore it, preserve it, and make all those improvements. You can look at all the damage, and you don't want people going into the tower if it is like that. It's not safe. We project that the work will take 2 to 3 years to complete. This is the wow. The big wow is to get the public up into the tower. It's really special. You've heard the talk about it. You've seen some of the views. It will be a ticketed tour. We can't have every visitor to the Alcatraz Island going up. It's just physically not possible. But the island already has a number of special tours. The garden tour, the bird tour, the after-hour tour, the ghost tour. This will be the lighthouse tour. And also, we will make it ADA accessible, where you'll see the next slide. We're going to put on the top right is a planned observation deck on top of where the lighthouse keeper's house was. We will also we're hoping to add a view cam from the top of the lighthouse, so people that can't physically climb the tower, they can still see interpretive what's going on from up there, so they can share the view. And the deck will be ADA accessible. Also, this is where Lisa's architectural firm comes in, they've already come up with some renditions of how to do interpretations. On the bottom left slide, you can see on top of the deck, we proposing to outline the house and what the rooms were and talk about how it was like to live in the lighthouse as a keeper's family. Many generations or young people lived with their families on the island. And on the right, that's part of the cell house. There's a unused area that looks out right across onto the lighthouse. We're proposing to put a display, a historical maritime display in there about lighthouses and the history. So that's the educational part. And then ongoing is get monies to maintain the work we've done, continue the access, and build on expanding education. Then to talk about the phases. We have 5 phases of this Alcatraz Lighthouse Preservation Project. Phase 1 has been completed. There was a historic structures report completed in 2017. It was funded by Land's End Incorporated, the clothing manufacturer. Their logo is a lighthouse. So we appreciated what they did for us. Initial fundraising and support from the Lighthouse Society. We created the video, and we have an active website as well. That was about $50,000. Phase 2, we're moving into 2024. Fundraising. You'll see fundraising at the top of each of these phases. Lisa's group will, with the assumption that we will get our funding, they'll update the work that needs to be done. The historic structures report informs the type of construction that needs to be done to preserve the tower and restore the tower. So we need to get bids, we have to confirm the estimates, etc., and select contractors to get ready to move into the actual execution in 2025 through 2026. So we're looking at $200,000 for 2024. We need to raise those funds, but with the mindset that we need a lot more money to do the execution. And that would be the working with the tower, and then also starting and building the interpretive modules. Then in 2026, we open the tower for the public and continue fundraising. And then phase 5 is onward.
And we're not daunted in the slightest by phase 3 and the amount of money represented. Knowing how much Ron's spending on the Hyde Street Pier, that's a drop in the bucket. So really, why is it important for the Lighthouse Society to become involved with the Alcatraz Lighthouse? We have the National Park Service, we have the Coast Guard, we have local organizations. Can't they get involved? Well, the problem is that Alcatraz is a unique situation. The island is owned by the National Park Service, and the U.S. Coast Guard owns the little circle of land around the lighthouse and the lighthouse itself. And the two of those two organizations do not like to play together. There was a act passed by Congress in 2000 which required the Coast Guard to transfer lighthouses through a process. They couldn't just give a lighthouse to Ron if they wanted to because he was a nice guy. No, now you have to go through an application process, and Ron would have to show he can preserve a lighthouse and he can actually open it to the public. That's the key thing. We want to keep lighthouses open to the public. So the Lighthouse Preservation Act of 2000 was passed, and now the Coast Guard just can't accept the property. So now the Coast Guard can't just transfer the property to the National Park Service, because the National Park Service has to step up and say, okay, we have this much money to put into it, we can do this work to it, we can open it to the public. That's not happening. And so why we're involved, we're here to bridge that gap. We're going to get the lighthouse restored, we're going to get the lighthouse open to the public, and we're going to make it possible for that transfer to occur so that the lighthouse can be part of the National Historic Park. That's why we're involved with this particular project. And if you look down at the bottom of this slide here, you'll see that there have been some major funding for lighthouses recently in California. And Pigeon Point, most recently, from California State Parks. It's a state park. They got a bunch of funding, $13 million. Point Bonita, that Lisa's working on right now, That was the bridge project. They restored the bridge across the way. They got a $500,000. Point Reyes, I think that number is about right, $8 million for Point Reyes. And that was a federally funded National Park Service project. And the Point Arena Lighthouse, the one I worked for, we actually applied for a grant before I stopped working there from the California Cultural Historic Endowment, another California fund. But unfortunately, we can't, the money is not there. The National Park Service doesn't own the Alcatraz Lighthouse. They own Point Bonita, they own Point Reyes. They're going to put the money into that now, but they can't own Alcatraz. So they can't tell the Coast Guard we're going to put them. It's a catch-22. So we're trying to bridge that gap. I hope I've made that clear. Did I confuse you completely? No. Okay. Just know this, that the Lighthouse Society is important to this process. And then, of course, we call them our partners. So we have, of course, even though the National Park Service and the Coast Guard are key players, they are our partners as well. And so we're working with them closely. And of course, I'm sorry for the fuzzy logo there, but we captured it from your website. The Architectural Resources Group with Lisa represents, who's our architects in the local area here. And we also, we've been doing, prior to COVID, we've been really marketing this heavily, trying to get local support. And we have great buy-in from the Chamber of Commerce in San Francisco. The local supervisors and commissioners love the project. Legislative support. We've gone to Sacramento and pounded the halls in Sacramento, knocking on doors. I mean, we've actually gone into the governor's office as well and tried to get a meeting with him. And of course, we have our local volunteers, which are amazing. Barbara, who is the lead of those. And Barbara and I wanted to point this out to everybody here. Look at the logo, the artwork that the Golden Gate National Recreation Area chose to represent the Alcatraz. You guys are all familiar with these artworks. There's a series of them that represent different icons in the San Francisco Bay. Isn't it interesting that they chose the lighthouse to represent Alcatraz Island as opposed to anything else on the island? And I think we just think this represents the importance of this icon in the Bay Area. Okay.
All right, so how can you help? I am, as it's been said, I am the primary, mostly only volunteer here local in the Bay Area. I have been plugged into this project since before 2017. I love this project. I love all that it represents. And we have created, as of now, the Alcatraz Lighthouse Preservation Society, ALPS, with lofty goals. Yes. So we want people to donate. We want people to become advocates, to help spread the word. We want to bring people onto this committee to help with fundraising, people who are networked, people who have experience, people who are enthusiastic. There's so much to be done, so many opportunities, and everyone is welcome.
And we really are interested in local support here in the Bay Area because this is your lighthouse. It's hard for me to tell somebody in New York support Alcatraz, but telling you here in the Bay Area, this is our icon to preserve. So that's why we're really pushing for local support. And
we were thrilled when Ron invited us to come talk here today because there's such synergy between the St. Francis Yacht Club and the lighthouse. I mean, it's right there. It's always there. We race around it. We We see it. We cherish it, I hope. And so I encourage you to step up. You can reach Jeff on the website or reach him. We have our website. We have his email on there. And we hope to see you on our committee.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bring your mic. Jeff, you were in the middle.
Yep.
Jeff's in the middle. Lisa.
Just turn it like this. Great. Thanks, Jeff and Barbara, and welcome, Lisa.
Thank you.
Holy cow. So, a couple of questions. First of all, how many lighthouses are there in America?
Well, there's approximately 800 lighthouses remaining in America. There once was over 1,000, so we've lost quite a few of them. And then there's another group of buildings that we try to preserve as well at the US Lighthouse Society. The US Lighthouse Society called life-saving service buildings. Have you heard of the Life Saving Service? They complemented the United States Lighthouse Service. And so when a lighthouse keeper reported a shipwreck, you'd have people dispatched from life-saving services, but the life-saving stations are far less in number. We only have a couple of hundred remaining. But if it weren't for organizations like the US Lighthouse Society, those numbers would be going down. So we're lucky that they're not diminishing. They're remaining constant.
And then how many lighthouses are there in California and how many in the Bay Area?
Barbara, do you want to take that one?
No.
There's over.
I don't know.
Do you want to take that one?
You said she was smart.
There's over 20 lighthouses in California.
Okay.
Up and down the coast. It's a big coast, a lot of lighthouses, but not the state with the most lighthouses. The state with the most lighthouses in the U.S. is Michigan, believe it or not. Yes, Michigan on Great Lakes.
Michigan, yes.
Yes. Has anybody sailed on the Great Lakes in this room? I love the Great Lakes. I was a sucker when I started working for the U.S. Lighthouse Society. Never been there before, and I had a chance to go, and now I go every chance I get. I just love the lakes. Anyways, so yes, about over 20 in California.
Okay, and how many in the Bay Area?
I would say active lighthouses.
I would say
4.
in the Bay Area, I could count them now. We could probably see 4 or 5 right here.
Which one?
So you have Pigeon. Further
You've got
south
Point.
is- yeah.
You got Point Bonita, Fort Point. There's one Baker Beach, Alcatraz, East Brothers.
East Brother Island.
There's some light sticks in the middle of shoal. Somebody's shoal. I forgot what it's called, but we always didn't want to run over that when we were racing.
So
Yeah.
now, we in this yacht club, we actually kept the lighthouse. There used to be one at Southampton Shoal, and when it was going to be decommissioned, the club fathers, Denny Jordan among them, arranged for Rice Brothers to lift it off its stand, put it on a barge, and bring it to Tinsley Island, where we celebrated. In fact, we even have some lighthouse talks on the porch of the lighthouse every year. People can come and stay on the lighthouse in Tinsley Island, and it's a beautiful feature. It actually becomes the cornerstone feature of our island. When people look at posters of Tinsley Island, the lighthouse is always prominently featured. And you mentioned that the posters for the GGNRA in the Bay Area include a series by Michael Schwab. He's the illustrator that did that poster. And yes, he chose the tower in Alcatraz to feature when mentioning Alcatraz. So that gets me to Alcatraz. How many tourists a year come to Alcatraz Island?
1.5 million.
Okay, and they usually go to the prison cells. What do they visit there?
Their ticket gets them the ride to and from the island and the free audio tour throughout the cell house.
And so now what you guys are proposing is that we add a feature to the tourism of Alcatraz, which is a great benefit to the city of San Francisco. That is to say, we are becoming and really make more money on tourism than many other activities. We're no longer a shipping capital, we're a tourism capital. And so tourists who come to Alcatraz might have another reason to come to Alcatraz. They could get a tour, go up to the top of the tower and so on. So how high will the tower be, and how many people could you put through that, go up to the tour every day?
I'm not sure how tall the tower is.
The tower is almost 90 feet. And I'll be honest with you, Ron. We haven't done the metrics exactly to know how many people can actually access the tower each day, but it won't be as many as visit the island, because physically it would be impossible to get everybody up and down.
Sure.
But anybody who does get that opportunity will be able to go to the top, get inside the lantern, look at the view, and possibly even go in the exterior gallery if we can rehabilitate it to a standard where it's safe. So we're excited about that, but unfortunately we don't have those exact numbers at the moment.
So you said the tower is going to be 90 feet tall, and it looks to me like the tower's base is something like that height off the water. So it could
the restoration is not going to alter the height of the lighthouse.
Uh-huh.
We're just going to rehabilitate what's there, so and make it safe for public access.
And the point I'm getting to is it's going to be roughly 20 stories up, and that's a pretty good view of the Bay Area, and you'll be able to get a 360-degree view. So this isn't just a a casually interesting tourist feature. This could be a very key tourist feature, and maybe you would create, a bit of a lottery when you go in Alcatraz. Every 10th or 100th person might get a chance to go up to the top. So it could be some value there. So that gets us to the architecture. What is different about designing lighthouses, Lisa, and designing other structures?
I think lighthouses are unique. We've had an opportunity to work on a number of the lighthouses that Jeff actually showed on his slide. We recently redid, about 5 years ago, we did the rehab of the Point Reyes Lighthouse, and we're currently working on some design for the Point Bonita Lighthouse. And lighthouses certainly have their own challenges. Material conservation is obviously very important. They're on the marine environment, and the salts just have such an impact on these buildings. But we want to conserve as much as possible, so we don't want to do any kind of replacement unnecessarily. So definitely taking kind of a light hand, but also just planning for maintenance when we're doing the work. A lot of these organizations have very limited funds to maintain the lighthouses, and so we want to make sure that any work that we do under a rehab is going to take us as long as possible, be as durable as possible, because just respect to that kind of the maintenance needs for these. And then, we talked a little bit about, certainly the Alcatraz Lighthouse. We want visitors to be able to experience it, but that comes with its own challenges. We have the tower that we need to make safe for people to visit. We need to make it accessible to certain people, and there's just an interpretation component as well. How people that can't visit the tower, how can they still grasp and understand the lighthouse so they can understand the history of it? And Barbara was talking earlier about how we had given some examples about how we can bring that interpretation back down to the kind of deck level so that everyone can experience that. So those, I think, are maybe a few aspects that are unique to lighthouses that we've encountered.
So what will be the useful life after a restoration of the lighthouse?
When we're doing a typical building, we always like to say a good 20 or 30 years until we get a certain rehab. I would probably say maybe similar to a lighthouse. Doing it 20
So
or 30
Jeff,
years out of it.
what are the mechanics of the lighthouse? How does it generate light, and what's the oscillation frequency, and so on?
Historically, Alcatraz would have had a what's called a Fresnel lens, a beautiful optic that an oil lamp would have been inserted into, and it would have had a unique light signature. It could have been 2 flashes every 3 seconds. It could have been 1 flash every 10 seconds, but it would have been unique. And all lighthouses along the California coast would have had a unique light signature, all projected by these amazing Fresnel lenses that they were developed in France to project and refract and reflect the light so that mariners like you could see them. Before that, they would be using candelabras and IOB burners and things that really weren't that effective. Fast forward to today, the same engineering that was used to develop these big, beautiful Fresnel lenses is now used on these little tiny modern electric lights. Technology of the projection of light is still the same, but the Coast Guard, they don't need lighthouses anymore to preserve a lens and an oil lamp. All they need to do is put a light on a mounted pole, and rightly so. They shouldn't be wasting taxpayers' money by taking care of buildings that we really don't need. That's where we come in. That's why it's important for the Lighthouse Society, because we bridge that gap. We want to preserve the history of the lighthouses and the lighthouse technology. And the Coast Guard still maintains the active aids and navigation, but we help with the preservation. So the aid and navigation at Alcatraz is, I don't know the exact light signature, but I can tell you that it's a modern rotating electric light, VRB25 if I'm not mistaken technically, and it has a unique light signature so that mariners can determine which lighthouse they're looking at amongst all the other ones on the coast. Thank you, sir. Every 5 seconds, Ron.
A flashing 5-second white?
I just remembered.
A flashing 5
every
second
5 seconds.
So those who haven't sailed in the bay when it's foggy may know a previous previous Wednesday Yachting Luncheon speaker. He flew Pan Am Clippers from Treasure Island, where they took off, over to Hawaii and back. And one of the times that he was coming back to San Francisco, it was so foggy, so amazingly foggy, that he went down to just a little above sea level. He said like 60 feet above sea level. And he came along the coast and sailed along and came inside the gate and he went underneath the bridge, literally went underneath the bridge, underneath the Golden Gate Bridge. It's in the 50s or 60s, and he was here and gave this talk. And he said when he came through, the next thing he saw was the doggone lighthouse. And he said he couldn't see the city because it was blanketed, but he could see the island and he could see, the lighthouse. And so he didn't want to go above the fog level, but he could see the base of it underneath the fog level and use that to navigate into Treasure Island and land his big, giant seaplane. They were seaplanes.
Yeah, when I was in Europe a few years ago, I saw a unique Fresnel lens, a historical one, which had the light panels around the sides for ships, but it also had one panel at the top. And the lantern rim had an opening at the top, and the lighthouse is actually used not only for ships to navigate, but for airplanes to navigate as well. And that was in the Netherlands, the first time I'd ever seen that before.
Yeah. So when you're out raising dough, corporate sponsorship's got to be a big piece of what you're going to do. When we did our first America's Cup Challenge from San Francisco, we raised $8.7 million, and I got $1.5 million from Pacific Telesis. That's a lot of money of the 8.7. And then we got money from Coca-Cola and Buick and other corporate sponsors, Domaine Chandon and Robert Mondavi. But that corporate piece of the total amount of money we raised was around half of all the bucks we raised. Now, in your particular case, what's going to be the role of corporate sponsorship, or what do you imagine it to be?
We have lists and lists of potential donors, corporate foundations, local people with interests. We've been advised for a capital campaign to have a few key donors, high-profile donors first, and then bring on.
So what I was going to get to is, are you offering naming rights? Are you going to change it from being the Alcatraz to the equivalent of, the Pac Bell Park or Oracle Arena?
We have some restrictions.
We hope not.
Yeah, branding. We can't, turn the lighthouse into a carnival or a vehicle for advertising, although a lot of companies probably would love the opportunity to do that. But
it's a national park.
It's a national park. It's a national historic park. So we have some restrictions. But here's the thing. In San Francisco, the dollar amount needed to restore the Alcatraz Lighthouse, if you look at it, is relatively low comparatively speaking. You probably could agree to that. I mean, we're talking about a few $1 million as opposed to tens or even hundreds of millions. And so we are looking at corporate sponsors as being the lion's share of our project. And even though we can't use the lighthouse as an advertising vehicle for these corporate sponsors, we can give them naming rights. We can give them credit, and we can give them some presence, whether it's inside the lighthouse, inside the cell block, so that people can be acknowledged for their contribution.
So I mentioned the America's Cup before. The economic benefit to Perth, Australia, for the '87 Cup was about $1.2 billion, and that was the net the gross economic benefit of having it. Had the Cup not been there, it would not have brought $1.2 billion to the Perth area. In Bermuda, the America's Cup was worth less because the environment, the metropolitan area of Bermuda has 80,000 permanent residents, and it's very difficult for people to get there versus getting to Perth. Well, San Francisco's got lots of benefits. In other words, you could make the case that San Francisco's a tourist town, and if we can enhance tourism, we're on purpose for benefiting San Francisco, and lots of people know about Alcatraz, and you're talking about enhancing a known feature. So talk to me a little bit about the appeal you'll make to corporate sponsors.
Well, it depends on the corporate sponsor. We've considered shipping companies such as Matson. We've talked about GPS companies, the old with the new, the old technology of the lighthouse and the history, and how it's bridged to the new modern companies. Depends on how the company would want to use the story, how they would feature it. So it's a case by case.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We can be honest too. I mean, this is why we're here. We need help in the fundraising aspect of this whole project, and we need the expertise of people who can, help us make those connections and tell us what we can offer corporations in order to get them to want to come in and assist us. So We don't have all the answers, and we're hoping to get local support to get them.
So now I'm going to keep asking questions until I see a hand up for somebody who wants a microphone. John, I see a microphone right over there. So you're welcome to ask questions from the audience. We hope you will. David James.
Just curious whether you've approached any of the Indian casinos.
That's not something we've talked about. It's certainly a possibility. But remember, the light station on Alcatraz is part of the national park. So, we do have some restrictions of what we can do out there. But certainly approaching Native American casinos is a possibility for funding, absolutely. Since predating any lighthouse or military history or prison history, it was a Native American site. So it is a possibility to approach them.
So a different type of question. With GPS and AIS as navigational aids, why do ships need this lighthouse?
That's a very common question, and it's something that I always, whenever I led these tours for the Lighthouse Society, I was always, my mantra would be, lighthouses are really important to preserve, but they're not really needed for navigation anymore because of modern technology, GPS primarily. And on one of the tours, I was corrected by a retired rear admiral from the Navy who said, "Nope, Jeff, you're wrong. So we use lighthouses all the time, especially when we're coming into San Francisco Bay or bays like the San Francisco Bay, tight harbors. They're used as reference even to this day." And that is a fact. And the Coast Guard still maintains lighthouses as active aids to navigation for that very reason. If GPS and modern technology could completely replace lighthouses, then the Coast Guard wouldn't have any use for any lights at lighthouses, but they do. So they're still important. Maybe not as important, and of course they're automated and the human role at the lighthouse is diminished, but they're needed still for boat safety.
A question from David James.
Yeah, I'm going to ask some questions that have been submitted over the chat function. The first one, I'm going to proceed with an editorial on my own behalf. When I was a young man, we took an overnight trip down to Pigeon Point Lighthouse, which was, for a fifth grader, just a fascinating field trip and fascinating history, and a lightship with a Fresnel lens and the whole 9 yards. So it incorporated natural history and physics and much else besides. But the question is it feasible to have field trips for local schools to feature the lighthouse in the excursion to Alcatraz, and is there a lighthouse docent?
Absolutely. That is one of our main goals, is the education. Not only to raise people, to get people to go up to the lighthouse, but to educate people about lighthouses in general, aids to navigation, and the Alcatraz Lighthouse. It's an ideal spot to have class trips to go out there. And it will be docents, because we can't rely on the park rangers to do all the tours. So we will enlist helps of docents dedicated for the tours.
Yeah, and just to add to that, this is in our wheelhouse anyways. The US Lighthouse Society already conducts tours to lighthouses domestically and internationally, and we oftentimes arrange local school groups to go to specific lighthouses, no matter where they are in the country. So, adding Alcatraz to our already existing program of school tours is going to be a no-brainer.
So as a junior high school student, I had a very unusual experience with Alcatraz. Old-time sailors here will remember Denny Jordan, and specifically his boy, Denny Jordan Jr., who had a Mercury. We had Mercury sailors in the room, in fact. Mercury Nationals was just on San Francisco Bay last week. Anyway, we're sailing back in a race, back to the finish line in St. Francis, and my skipper, Denny Jordan Jr., and I'm like 13, he's 16, and we're going in really close to Alcatraz on the starboard tack. And I'm now looking up, and I'd never gotten so close to Alcatraz that I was looking up at the island, not at the island, horizontally. And I remember saying to Denny, I really remember saying to Denny, "Holy cow, we're getting awfully close, Denny." And he'd say, "Act like we're pulling somebody on board. We're on a starboard tack." And I go, "What?" And he says, "Come on, act like we're pulling." And so I lean over the leeward side of the boat, and I kind of make this kind of motion. And just as I'm doing that, this loudspeaker we hear says, get that boat out of here. Get that boat out of here. Off of Alcatraz. This is a restricted area. Get that boat out of here.
Right.
Denny, who is quite a prankster, he says, "Oh yeah, it's working. Act like we're pulling somebody on board." And then they say something else in the midst of the next little passage of words. Those words are interrupted by about 3 lengths in front of us, machine gun fire, and immediately Denny changed his mind. Denny immediately pulled the tiller to weather, let the main out, and we turned 90 degrees and started heading to Treasure Island. This was not good for the results in the sailboat race. But I remember being thereafter told in this grill room by Tom Conroy, who we later confessed our childish prank to. He said, that doesn't mean anything. They shot a hole in our sail. So the Alcatraz was a real genuine prison. It was a real genuine lighthouse before that, and it's been in the middle of San Francisco Bay for over a century, and people know all about it. And so I think your case is we could enhance this major tourist attraction in a tourist-oriented city, and you want to get public support to do so, and you want to basically make it available to lots of people, including school children, and you want to basically provide an economic value for your good volunteer work.
Nice summary. Yes.
Great. Do we have another question from people online? If we do, raise a hand. Yep, David does.
Yes, there's one further question. What is the beam width of a lighthouse light? And he didn't ask, but I'll ask on his behalf, both for a Fresnel lens and for the new LEDs.
Well, the width of the light is not the important measure. It's the distance of the light. And Alcatraz would have been a 4th order Fresnel lens. It would have been quite bright, and it would have had, again, this unique light signature, 5 flashes every minute, or yeah, one flash every 5 seconds. I just remembered, 1 flash every 5 seconds. And the modern lights are similar in nature. They have the same signature, but they're not quite as bright. They're not quite as awe-inspiring. Certainly, some people say that the Fresnel lenses are the heart of the lighthouses. And when they modernize them, they being the Coast Guard, for good reasons, it was a little bit disenchanting for all of us who just love the lighthouse history. But we do our best. Occasionally we're able to bring a lighthouse lens back into a tower. We just recently were successful in doing it in New York at the Montauk Lighthouse on Long Island, one of the original colonial lighthouses. Did you guys know that the lighthouses in America were built as far back as the colonial days, that George Washington himself actually signed off on building lighthouses? Montauk Point, one of them, Portland Head in Maine. They go way back in American history. They're super important to preserve.
How many people have visited a lighthouse? Look at this. More than half the room visited a lighthouse. Holy cow. So when you think about lighthouses in San Francisco Bay, they're all kind of touristy things these days. So you got a pretty good case that they have already got a tourist reputation. And this one's like on Alcatraz, so it can be right in the middle of the bay. And the viewing from the top is significant. It's also the case, if you were a Sea Scout, you remember that 200 feet above the ocean, given the gravitational curve of the Earth, a light can be seen 16 miles away at 200 feet. So update my Sea Scout remembrance of that fact.
You're exactly right. And, just adding to those comments, Alcatraz is a unique lighthouse, not only in America or in California, but in the world. Think about it. You could go to anywhere in the world and say the word Alcatraz, and people are going to know what you're saying. It's like the word okay. Alcatraz is universal. And so what we're excited about probably the most at the US Lighthouse Society is Alcatraz's potential to introduce lighthouse preservation in general to millions of people who otherwise may not even know about the subject. Alcatraz's unique property, it's an interesting lighthouse, but it has the potential to touch millions, and that's what we're really excited about.
Well, Jeff Gales, Executive Director of the US Lighthouse Society, Barbara Paley, lead volunteer of the Lighthouse Society and the Restoration Project on Alcatraz, and Lisa Yurkovich, thank you so much for sharing with us your vision, your project. It's an inspiring one. We hope you lots and lots of success. Thanks for being our guest on the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Thanks for having us.